So we're going to, even though it's a town hall, not necessarily call it to order, but say we're starting at 6:49. And the procedure we're going to do, first of all, I would like Sylvia, or Madam Secretary, if you're here, I would like to take a roll just to the committee members to know what's here so that we can note that down and so that our guests can hear who's here from the committee, because they might not know everyone. So if we could do that first, Madam Secretary. Sylvia, if you think you're talking, you're not.
Here.
There you are.
All right. Sylvia Arrowwood, I'm here. Paul Bracco.
Present.
Okay. Nicholas Sazelski.
Here.
All right. Karen Ann Harlos, Chair.
Present.
Rob Latham. I'll call him again. I didn't see his square up there. Frank Martin.
Present.
Yes. Ken Molman.
I'm here for 15 minutes.
Okay. Tom Rowlett.
Here.
Okay. Mike Ruffo. Call him again. Michael Seebeck.
Here.
All right. Rob Latham. Okay. Rob Latham. All right. Mike Ruffo. Mike Ruffo. Madam Chair, we have 2 absent and 1 member will be leaving after 15 or 20 minutes.
Could we also call on the alternates, please?
Yes. Number 1, Dr. Chuck Moulton.
Here.
Fine. Number 2, Rich Tomaso. Rich Tomaso. Okay. Dave Roberson.
Here, ma'am.
Thank you. Greg Deal. Greg Deal. Okay. Roger Roots.
Here.
Fine. Data Logan. Dean Rogers.
I'm here.
All right. And I'll call again. Number 2, Rich Tomaso. Rich Tomaso. I'll mark him absent. Greg Deal. Greg Deal. Data Logan. Data Logan. Madam Chair, we have 3 absent. Number 2, Rich Tomaso. Number 4, Greg Deal. And number 6, Data Logan. Those were the alternates.
Okay, so thank you, Madam Secretary. The format we're going to follow, we do have 2 hours, and if members wish to take the entire 2 hours, it's been set aside for them. If we run out of questions or topics, we'll move on to some committee business, but I really don't anticipate that happening. I think there probably will be enough questions. What I have up on the screen is the package I prepared for this town hall, which has the proposals that have passed out of committee so far. But the introduction to them, just for the members' benefit, is these, even though they've been passed out of committee, because we still have quite a bit of time till the convention, they are open to revision. They might be dropped. The ordering of them is completely up in the air. This is just the work of the committee so far. We intend upon having multiple town halls in order to hear thoughts early from members, because you might point out a problem we didn't see, or you might point out an improvement, or even some entirely new suggestions. So we want the involvement of members as much as possible. And as I scroll down in this report, one second, I don't like this preview program. You'll see there's some links, and if you need a copy of this report, it is on the main lp.org website. On the front page, there's an announcement of this meeting, and it has a link to this report. There was one typo a member pointed out to me. I fixed it in the copy that's displayed on the screen, but it's not a meaningful one that will change the content. But if you see there's some links that are right after the introduction where it says important reference links that are hopefully helpful, there is a timeline where you can go and see how this committee is shaping up, what it anticipates doing next. But you can also see a master proposal sheet, so you can see proposals that are coming up. You can see a working copy of the amended bylaws and convention rules with the markup, so you could see so far what it would look like or what's going to be presented. And also all of these things are kept up to date on the committee Lpedia page. Rather than just kind of going through this, which I am absolutely prepared to do, though I am going to minimize this and do something different with preview. I do not like what preview is doing. I first would like to open the floor to member questions or discussions. We can go through each proposal one at a time, but I tend to find there might be several or one or two that members want to get right to, or even a suggestion they might have that they want to get right to. So as much as possible, I would like this to be a member-driven discussion, though, of course, I'm willing to lead it if people start off a little shy. I do see Mr. Bill Schultz has his hand raised. So, Mr. Schultz, you have the floor.
Thank you. This is Bill Schultz with Libertarian Party of Kentucky. So I'm joining this call because I wanted to see what we could do from a bylaw standpoint regarding getting the Libertarian Party's presidential and I guess vice presidential candidates selected earlier. You know, a lot of talk in my county affiliate about how they're always selected too late. Now, I emailed Paul Bracco about this, and he did respond to me, which was fantastic, about actually how the bylaws do allow for us to get it done a lot earlier, not for 2024, of course, but for 2028. But I guess I had two follow-ups that I thought were better discussed on a call like this. Number one would be, what would the committee think about changing the bylaws in a way that requires the candidate to be chosen earlier? But if not that, just hoping I can leverage some of your guys' experience and expertise in the party about even outside of bylaws, like what would it take to actually make that happen? Again, the objective is 2028, you know, that we select our presidential candidate much earlier than we have in the past. Specifically, of course, for the purpose of actually getting media exposure and all that. So that's all. I appreciate the discussion. Thank you all for your commitment to this group.
And thank you, Mr. Schultz. And I ask committee members to raise their hands if they wish to address any of these questions. I will address it, and I'm sure other people will have other ideas. The bylaws do allow for a window of time. I personally am not amenable to making it required to be early because there's a reason the bylaws were made flexible. The date is chosen by the LNC. So in order to have 2028 be earlier, that would have to be a decision of the LNC. And it probably wouldn't be this LNC, it would be the next one. It was really unusual that the prior LNC booked 2 conventions ahead. Normally, we just book 1. I can tell you, however, and this LNC is not of one mind on this. I am probably in the minority. I am opposed to the idea, and let me explain why. I'll also stick in chat, or if you can email me, there is a long discussion I did on this with former National Chair Steve Dasbach, who's been around the party a long time and is probably the ideological opposite to me. So this isn't an ideological issue. And he also is opposed to it, though thinks earlier in the same year would be better. But the reason it got moved, whenever anyone proposes a bylaws change, what I ask everyone to ask themselves is, why are we doing it the way we're doing it now? And did we used to do it differently? Particularly, did we used to do it the way you're suggesting? Because that means it wasn't working for some reason, and that's why it changed. We used to nominate our candidates the year before. And we changed this in the 90s. And it was because of ballot access laws in the state. If we nominated our candidates too much earlier, it would screw with ballot access. But let's say even in a state where it doesn't, such as Colorado, which I can speak to of being my home state, our statutes require us to have our convention in a certain window of time, which is between like the end of February and the end of May, let's just say. I think it's a little bit shorter window than that, but you get the idea. If the national convention was earlier than that or late in the previous year, that would force Colorado to have 2 conventions every other year in order to select its delegates. Because if you select your delegates too far ahead of time, you have people who end up not being with the party anymore. They can't plan that far ahead of time. Maybe they do something wacky that there's buyer's remorse. You can't select delegates too far ahead of time. And what's going to start happening is boards are going to start selecting delegates, and that will not be representative, and it will be rife for abuse, because sometimes the board isn't as representative of the whole state party in general. And it will increase costs on states like Colorado, force them to have 2 conventions every other year, because we'll have to have the one required by statute and then one just to select delegates, which will by its very nature be poorly attended. So I saw Mr. Molman had his hand up. Mr. Madden, you'll be next with member questions. And then I saw Dr. Moulton and Mr. Bracco. So Mr. Molman.
Yes. So the scheduling ahead of conventions does happen. I know in 2010, they scheduled the 12 and 14 conventions. And obviously in 2020, we scheduled the 22 and 24 conventions. It all depends on which convention committee gets there and how much time they have and how experienced they are. And it kind of falls out as far as how they get chosen that far ahead. Oftentimes is because the RFP process, there's just 2 strong choices, and we only have one. We can only do one convention at a time. But often we're able to negotiate, especially further out. The Washington D.C. in 24, we would never get that kind of deal normally. So that's kind of how that ends up happening with the scheduling ahead. As noted, it is an LNC decision. The LNC has the ability to. There are some risks with deciding early. There was talk, for instance, of trying to change the 2024 venue. That would have been pretty costly for the party because the contract, I think, had a $50,000 penalty clause for bowing out. But it is really just an LNC decision as to when to hold the convention. Now, the real problem with holding it earlier is when. We have typically held our conventions on Memorial Day weekend or 4th of July weekend because those are weekends where typically there's an extra day.
You cut out, Mr. Molman.
What I was trying to say was that we do Memorial Day and 4th of July because there's an extra day off, so people aren't having to take 2 days off work, or they get, most people are off an extra day that week. That's typically why we choose those weekends. The problem with going back, and by the way, I actually support the earlier convention and doing so in the year prior, but the issue has been when. And, at the end of the year, people are very, very busy. So November, December, you've got Thanksgiving and Christmas. I did actually have someone with a straight face propose having it over Thanksgiving, and I'm like, wow, you have no friends and no family. I'm sorry to hear that. But you would end up inevitably having to do it on Labor Day weekend, probably, which is not impossible. But now we're back into September, right? We're pushing back pretty far, and that's early September, if I remember correctly. So that is quite a bit further back. And the main concern that I have heard, and from people like Mr. Dosbach, is that donor fatigue, where you run out of money at the end of the campaign because people have been donating for 6 or 8 months, and they're just like, I can't keep doing this. And so I don't know how much that holds true today, especially in an era where, we are pushing more months early throughout the party, and perhaps, changing to a strategy of monthly donations to reach a certain amount across a certain amount of time may be fruitful. But at the same time, here in Kentucky, Bill, we've had trouble raising money for our ballot access this time. So it's a give and take. I think there's pros and cons to each, but the main thing is that it is up to the LNC. And then, I have lobbied the LNC to do it earlier in the past. I do think labor that would make sense to do it if you're going to do it. Lobby the LNC. It's already there in the rules.
Thank you, Mr. Moulton, Dr. Moulton, then Mr. Bracco.
I agree with everything the previous speakers have said, but one additional point I want to add is you also get a trade-off if you hold the convention the previous summer as to what sorts of people decide to run for president. So many of our presidential candidates who were actually selected had not declared by that point. And obviously, behavior would change a bit depending on the rules. But it's a much larger commitment of time to run for an additional year. And there are some people who may be stronger candidates that we like that would choose not to run. And there may be other people who would be more interested in that sort of schedule. But I think the candidates, if I had to guess, we would get less well-known celebrity candidates because the opportunity cost of time tends to be higher for established politicians and well-known celebrities. Opportunity cost of time is lower for those who are just kind of professional libertarians, party activists. So I think we would get different sorts of candidates. That's one trade-off to keep in mind.
Thank you, Dr. Moulton. Mr. Bracco.
Sorry. To follow up on what Mr. Moulton was saying, I think that there would be options other than Labor Day weekend. Two that come to mind are either MLK or Anti-President's Day weekend. I'm sure that could be a nice theme if we ever wanted to do that. But I guess I really want to actually ask a question of Mr. Schultz. So you want to do it earlier, but how early is earlier?
Roughly around the same time that the Republicans and Democrats do. And because I think the disadvantage we're at is that obviously with them having primaries and public primaries, they get a lot of attention, even on their primary process. So I just feel like we're at a giant disadvantage. They have all this media attention for their primaries, and then they select their candidate. And I feel like, by the time we even select our candidate, it's already been set up as, as Republican versus Democrat.
So I think there's a problem with that without having a specific time frame, because it very much depends on, is there one candidate that's very dominant in one of their primaries? I think technically speaking, they don't hold their conventions until even after we do, their official convention. Mm-hmm. Isn't it in June and July?
Yep.
Or July and August, maybe even. So it depends on, are you looking at it from an official nomination standpoint or from a de facto nomination standpoint? Because the de facto is going to very much depend on what happens in that primary.
Yeah, no, not official. I mean, like I said, just Biden and Bernie or Hillary and Bernie, whatever. Like, that was just neither was the nominee in 20 or at certain points, 26, 15 or 16. Like everybody knew it was one of those two. That's what I was talking about. So de facto, no, official is an afterthought to me.
Well, then I think for planning purposes, a specific date would, like, are you thinking then early same year as election or previous summer?
No, I think
I think that one's a lot easier to sell.
I think your January or February is a reasonable suggestion.
Okay, Mr. Brecco, that would though be an LNC decision. I think that goes a bit beyond.
I don't want to dominate this meeting. So you guys, I understand exactly what you said, and I understand not wanting to make the bylaws more restrictive. You've given me great background, and it's perfect. So yeah,
I would suggest the entire committee and everyone who feels strongly on this issue, just in order to have information from a party veteran, to take a look at that link that I put in chat, because Mr. Dasmuck is not only a former national chair, I think 2 times. He's also a former executive director. He's was campaign manager for Joe Jorgensen. He's managed other campaigns. He brings up some really, really good points also about FEC problems with having it the year before. It seems that there's a lot more support for having it the same year, but maybe earlier. That doesn't win me over, but it does win other people over who might be opposed to it the year before, but would be up for it in February-ish of the current year. My reason is state affiliates. That's always going to be my concern. That's kind of been my shtick in general. And I think individual members talking about this a lot of times aren't really familiar with their own state bylaws and the burdens this would place on certain states. So thank you, though, Mr. Schultz. And yeah, it's definitely something to lobby the LNC for. And as I said, I think most of the LNC is in agreement with you. I'm definitely a minority voice on the LNC on this issue. One thing to add, I don't think this convention committee is going to be selecting the next 2. We've gotten our bids only for the next convention. So this is probably going to be an issue that will be dealt with by the next LNC. Perhaps. We shall see. Mr. Madden.
Yes, Madam Chair. If you would, could you scroll down to Proposal E? I want to make sure I'm referring to the correct
Okay, yep.
proposal
Just
here.
give me one moment. Platform deletion threshold?
Yes.
Okay.
So I just want to say that I think that if this passes, this is going to piss off a large share of the body, given what happened at the previous LNC convention, and that I think functionally this will also be a hindrance to the point where we're going to see the platform grow over time and not be deleted over time. And then another Portland massacre may take place. So I just want to say that I oppose Proposal E, and if there's any comments about that.
Okay, certainly. I'll take the lead and then we'll see what anyone else in the committee says. A deletion is an amendment, and it always seems strange to me to be treating it differently than any other. I actually, in talking with members, it's because of current anger over what happened last convention that they don't want to see happen again, that they want there to be a higher protection. And I'll give you the current fear. The current fear is that the immigration plank's going to get deleted with a majority vote, and all of a sudden we're going to become a closed border party. That is the fear. I think if 2/3 of Libertarian delegates said this is our platform, it should have some kind of protection in it where a smaller amendment, a smaller group shouldn't be able to come in and just gut it. It's the majority threshold is what allowed the Portland massacre. Every single point you said is actually, to me, an argument in favor of this proposal. I don't think the platform will continue to grow because it requires a 2/3 to pass it. And the culture today is of shorter rather than longer. And we changed this in Colorado. And one of the concerns on the floor was we would never be able to delete a platform plank again. Yet the very next day, we deleted a platform plank. If there's enough of a consensus that this is a libertarian principle that made it into the platform, that same consensus will be able to delete it. We should be changing our ideological statements in an ideological party with a 2/3, not a deletion. I mean, not a 50% for deletion. In Colorado, we proved it. There was something that just really, it passed. And then over the passage of a couple of years, because we don't do our platform every year, it just lost support and it easily got deleted. So I think we were a great test case in Colorado, and we disproved that it would be difficult to delete a very unpopular plank. Dr. Moulton.
Yeah, I completely agree with the questioner. I think this is a bad idea. I'm currently serving as an alternate on this committee, but if by the convention I become a full member of the committee, if there's a resignation or something, then I will certainly join in a minority report on this. Yeah, I don't agree with the position of the chair here, in that I think that there should be a different threshold for deleting than add-in, so that our platform just balloon over time. And you want people coming into each convention to have a certain amount of support for the platform. So it seems weird to have vestiges left over from years and years ago. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Dr. Moulton. Would any other committee member like to address? I believe Mr. Madden has some additional comments. Go ahead, Mr. Madden.
Yes, I feel like I may have been misheard. What I said in regards to the Portland massacre is I said that would be necessary to as release the air out of the balloon. So that sort of situation. I realized that was a majority vote, but that's why I'm saying this is that would be necessary in order to release the air out.
If the members will indulge me very quickly on a history lesson, a little bit. I think people misunderstand the Portland massacre, and I hope the radicals in the room don't come to murder me, but I think it's misunderstood and it gets demonized a bit. However, I'm not a fan of it, but there's some background that people don't understand. It wasn't allegedly necessary because the platform was too long, though some people may have felt that way. It was necessary because of what happened in 2004, where they screwed with the format of the platform into a completely unworkable tri-part format where you had it's called an accordion platform, where you had problem, interim, or solution. Dr. Moulton we could pull up even the 2004 platform. A lot of radicals who liked the length of the platform voted to delete it because it was a dumpster fire of a format. If I were there, I might have voted to delete it. And I like big platforms, and I cannot lie. But that format was hideous. We had it in Colorado too, and we deleted our entire platform in Colorado partly because of that. And it became so unworkable that we were still calling for the legalization of pot in Colorado. Okay, it's because it was a hot mess even to look at. I don't think we're ever going to get in that position again. So, again, if enough people think the platform's too long, you'll get the 2/3 to delete or combine or amend. But just parliamentary wise, a deletion is an amendment. To treat this differently than any other amendment is just very odd to me. Since I did invoke Dr. Moulton, I'd like to call upon him and then Mr. Rogers. Dr. Moulton.
It's just very quick. I partly agree with you. I think that the format played a large part in the Portland massacre. But there were also some platform planks that the size of the platform, even with independent of the format, had also gotten unwieldy. There was some people frustrated with the kitchen sink nature of talking about everything. And I do speak from history because I helped orchestrate the Portland massacre, so I know what I'm talking about. But yeah, all that aside, I think I've made my views clear on this particular thing.
And thank you, Dr. Moulton. And I'm getting as you know, you and I have exchanged data, and I've done multiple interviews of people whose votes were very surprising in 2006, because it wasn't a secret ballot then. And my information about the format is coming from people then who said why they voted to delete. And I think if we ended up with things like, legalization of iguanas plank, that delegates would get tired of it and delete it with a 2/3. I think we proved that in Colorado. But Mr. Rogers, then Mr. Roulette.
Yeah, I just wanted to weigh in as a person in favor of the proposal to make it easier to delete planks. The platform is unwieldy. There are places in it that are inconsistent. There are people out in the world who would join the party, but for a particular plank. I think it makes it easier for candidates with fewer planks. Then they can take their own positions and present themselves as an alternative. And I think it's important to remember that the deletion of a plank is not the taking of a position. It's deliberately no longer taking a position. And so it allows different factions to stay in the party and grow the party. So it should be easier to make the platform simpler so that more can join. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. And what I'm going to suggest, because it might be confusing to members when platform committee members speak until people get used to it, if you could say whether you're a primary member or an alternate, because I think some people may say, oh, I've heard several voices opposed to it. Why did this pass? I will note those were alternate members that happened to disagree with the majority, which is Dr. Moulton did mention that. Just bringing it up, not that anybody is lesser or better than or anything like that. Mr. Roulette.
Just to backtrack a little bit, sorry, this is a little out of order. Talking about convention dates, I think probably my personal ideal would be somewhere in the middle of June. And if we could get the bylaws to close the window a little bit around that ideal, like taking it out of August, I would be fine with that. And I'll probably propose it at an upcoming meeting just to see what people think about it.
Thank you, Mr. Roulette. Anyone further on this one? Okay, now I saw some persons in chat who had said it was Eric. Eric, did you want to bring up one of those four that you had indicated a preference for discussion? Mr. Thrain?
I went through the list and I just felt that proposals G, I, L, and P were the most interesting. I don't have a preference which one first. If no one else has a preference, we've been chatting about other things besides platform. If we could discuss bylaws, proposal G, I, L, and P.
Well, let's talk about G, and we'll see if anyone else raises their hand. I don't remember was this your proposal, Mr. Seebeck? The two that were mentioned before were ones that I was really involved in. This one I was not as involved in as much. Who would like to speak to this primarily? Mr. Bracco.
So I would probably not be the best person to speak to it, but I believe it was Mr. Latham's proposal.
And I don't think he is present.
He
Hello.
is.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Mr. Latham.
I joined late. And by the way, just before I did post this in the chat, I don't know where we can find this document that we're looking at. But I was late, so maybe that was disclosed then.
It's on lp.org. If you, there's a notice of the meeting, but I also posted this to the Bylaws Committee list. And it's also, I believe, linked in your registration link for this meeting. But if you go to lp.org, it says notice of town hall, and there's a link there.
Okay, well, I'll do that. In any event, so just to explain this and the rationale, maybe it just does, but I currently serve on the Judicial Committee, as does Mr. Seebeck, and we are both primary members of this Bylaws Committee. And as we were tasked with revising our rules of appellate procedure, we noted that we now have 4-year terms that used to be 2-year terms, and kind of encountered the issue of what if something comes up during that 4-year term. Under the existing rules, we only have like a 90-day window to propose new rules. So we just wanted to expand our ability to do that. So that's the basis of the proposal. It still has to get approved by the LNC, or at least not necessarily approved. They have to reject them by a 2/3 vote. So that's kind of a summary in a nutshell.
Mr. Seebeck?
Yeah, just to add to what Mr. Latham has said, there was a lot of animated discussion about this and a competing proposal within the committee, which I had put out there, which would have removed the approval of the rule of the JudCom rules from the LNC completely, proposing the idea of a pure separation of powers there. That obviously did not pass, and this proposal here emerged as a compromise after a lot of discussion to address concerns that were raised regarding not only any amendments to the rules when necessary, but also how to deal with the situation, as you see in the blue farther down there. What happens if there's a proposed change to these rules while a case is pending? We need to address that at the same time, and that's why that's in there. This proposal was not the ideal I would like to see. I'm not willing to let perfect be the enemy of the good, and this is actually pretty good.
Thank you, Mr. Seebeck. Mr. Thrain, did you have any questions on any of the explanations given on this one?
Yes, I'm reading the markup copy of the proposal down below, and I can't tell how often can the rules be updated within the 4-year term.
Would Mr. Seebeck or Mr. Latham like to answer? Mr. Latham?
Sure. Just under the current version, if you just look at the top, if we did not make this change, then we just have that 90-day window. And it's just that very first sentence. So we've kind of got 90 days to propose changes or forever hold our peace. Well, not forever, but for the next 4 years. So that's why it was felt that we ought to at least propose this.
I believe he was asking
more flexibility.
If this passes, how many times can it be changed?
Oh,
as needed.
Yeah, basically as needed and within the tolerance of the LNC. I imagine if we did something on a too excessive basis, then the National Committee would start getting tired of that and start denying those proposed changes.
And keep in mind something, the 60-day approval period is still intact. So it would not work very well if all of a sudden the Judicial Committee were to submit a flurry of one, then the other, then the next one, and so on, sets of different proposed rule changes within that 60-day period. You get to a point where it would avalanche the LNC and they would rightfully say no. So there is that to consider as well. So realistically, there's still 60-day periods for approval by the LNC, at which point while it could have more amendments submitted, from a practical perspective, it wouldn't get anywhere.
Hey, Mr. Thrain?
So I understand about the 60-day being some protection. I'm just wondering if is that adequate protection against the rules being changed with a case pending?
The proposal says in blue, while proposals are pending, the existing rules remain in effect. So while proposals are pending, there cannot be a change. They could submit one to the LNC, but they wouldn't go into effect until after any proposal pending was disposed of. And understand these are, I think some people are placing far too much weight on what these rules are. These are just special rules of order that say things like how the notice of hearing will be posted. Now, obviously, some of those things, could be tremendous inconvenience or can be prejudicial in some way to appealing members. It's not things that affect fundamental rights, which are secured in the bylaws. And also keep in mind, last term was an aberration. The Judicial Committee often, ideally, can go a decade without ever hearing a case. The last LNC is the most appealed LNC in history. It was very contentious, considering we have a 50-year history. I think Dr. Moulton might know, but I think the last appeal before that was 2012, though the Judicial Committee did a weird thing where it thought it was going to rescind something. I'm not counting that when I'm talking about an actual appeal from a member. Before that, it was 10 years before that. And then before that, it was the 70s, I think. So this is not something right now, the scope of the JC is so limited that there's not that many appeals heard. I actually would like to see the scope of the JC expanded a little bit, but as it stands right now, appeals are very rare.
The last JC would have preferred even less appeals. But
I'm sure, Dr.
was not to
Moulton.
be.
Mr. Bracco.
So I do want to just, I think, clarify a bit on the procedures of when a case is pending, what rules are, under which rules is it heard. So let's say we had a case, or we had rules that were in effect on April 10th, and you had a case or an appeal that was submitted on April 10th. And then that case is going to take a lot longer than 10 days. And the JC decides we want to, hey, LNC, here's some new rules today. That case, because it's already pending, no matter what happens, denial or the LNC lets it go, that case is going to be heard under the rules that were in effect on April 10th, regardless of what other rules the JC is going to submit. It's not that those rules don't come into effect until that case is disposed of, because if you had another case that was submitted tomorrow, let's say 60 days, so June 21st, then that case would occur under the April 20th rules, even if that April 10th case was still sort of ongoing.
Correct. I thought I attempted to word it carefully that they wouldn't come into effect for the pending appeals. Any subsequent ones would be under the new ones that were approved in the interim. So there might be two cases before the JC at one time under two different sets of rules.
And while that may seem complicated, it's also important because you don't want to be changing the rules in mid-stride of an appeal being heard. That creates more headaches than you want to deal with.
Okay, Mr. Madden.
Yes, I just wanted to bring up proposal I. Okay. So I was witness to this discussion, and I think I might have said it after the meeting then. If not, I'll say it here, that the original proposal that I read had more or less, it had one section of this area that would have been amended, and that was I believe it was the percentage to 1/3. And then it was brought up in discussion to do that and also increase our shall issue from 5 to 3. Doing both really doubles down on the increase, and I feel like that is not going to pass. And I think that this will be struck down for that reason.
Thank you, Mr. Madden. I don't know if anyone, I'll speak to it briefly because I wasn't, even though I generally don't vote unless it's to cause or break a tie. I think the delegates have an appetite to get rid of this section entirely. They don't like what happened last convention, and this was a very unpopular rule even before that. I think it's a powerful rule to give the delegates the opportunity to delete platform planks without it coming out of a committee. However, there's another proposal we haven't heard yet that Mr. Bracco was working on a little bit today, tweaking some things that I had proposed that may make me not so concerned about keeping this rule. But as the bylaws stand right now, I think this is a very powerful tool. And rather than risk it going away entirely, people were getting irritated at such a small number of delegates being able to force a vote. It wasn't just the last convention in which this left a bad taste in people's mouth. It was also in 2016, though I somewhat blame the platform committee for that one. There was a platform deletion token vote on the abortion plank, and it failed by a large margin. And then the platform committee proposed deletion of the same plank. To me, a wise committee chair, not saying they weren't wise, that's probably, I didn't mean to insult anyone's competence or anything like that. Hindsight's 2020. Perhaps they should have considered not bringing that proposal forward because it was perceived by the delegates as getting 2 bites at the apple. At that point in time, I was in favor of deleting the abortion plank. I was not and did not vote for it last time, just for the record. However, I voted it down when it came up with the committee because even I, as someone who was in support of it, said, we lost, get over it. So there was already a very bad taste in people's mouth about this rule. There is a delete Rule 5 caucus that comes into being before every convention as well. So if we don't make a big change to this rule is going away, I fear, and I don't want it to. That was kind of my motivation for supporting this. I believe Mr. Cizelski had his hand up first, then Mr. Bracco.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I supported this proposal. And the way the math ended up working out on this, I believe it takes about 10% of delegates if 10% of delegates each give 3 of their tokens to one plank. So that feels like a decently high threshold to consider something. And I also liked taking it down from 5 to 3 because honestly, I don't think we had that much in the platform. And I think even there were only a couple things last time that even got enough on there. And I don't see too much that I think 5, I don't see that many delegates probably going with, well, I want to delete 5 platform planks. So I think going down to 3 is maybe like, all right, what top 3 do you have? Or, if you're really adamant about 1, then you get, then you put all 3 towards 1. I mean, I think that this improves the system, especially with that race threshold. So that's all.
Thank you, Mr. Cizelski. Mr. Bracco?
So the discussion when this was up for debate, it was basically all math. So I'm going to do or try to do what I did during that debate, which was show everybody what the math is. Madam Chair, would you let me share my screen briefly?
For what purpose? Because I don't want to go too much into the weeds because I believe Mr. Madden made his point. So I don't want to go further and monopolize the discussion when other people might have questions on other ones.
It just to briefly show what the impact from a like math standpoint, like what does it take to create a vote? How does this change that?
Okay, you should have that ability.
Sure. Hopefully this should be pretty quick. So this is the current system, which is 5 tokens. I'm just assuming this delegate number and 20%. So that means that if 42 people put all 5 of their tokens toward deleting a plank, then we're voting on that. Under this proposal, if all those numbers stay as is, so the 1/3 and 3 tokens, that changes it from 42 to 117. So 117 people would have to put all 3 of their tokens toward that one plank in order for a vote to happen. In terms of the delegate percentage, that goes from 4% of the convention can create a vote to 11, little over 11 can create a vote. So that's the impact here. So I mean, this is definitely higher, but I mean, we're also talking about a vote that needs 50% to succeed. It's sort of like, at what point does it effectively become dilatory to create that vote? So that's all.
Thank you, Mr. Bracco. And if I could ask you, I think that demonstration is very useful, that perhaps on the rationales committee, you can incorporate that into the rationale. I think having that as part of our actual bylaws committee report and have that right in front of people will be really useful. That was very useful. Thank you. Mr. Madden.
Yes, just also from a math standpoint, my rebuttal to that is over double the current number. And that to me is a substantial increase that may come under scrutiny. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Madden. Okay, does anyone have a preference as to where we go next? I know Mr. Thrain, I'd have to scroll back up again, had suggested some. 1 second here. I'm scrolling. G-I-L.
It was L and P.
Okay,
G-I-L-P.
Okay, let's go to L. Okay. Whose proposal was this primarily? I know we simplified it, and I believe both Dr. Moulton and I spoke in favor of simplification, but Mr. Bracco, if you'd like to take the primary discussion on this.
Sure. So the purpose of this, could you scroll down? Yeah, this part. So the purpose of this is, I mean, simplification is nice, but that actually was not my initial intention. We are, given the current formula, we are to some degree hampered or helped in some states, depending on what that state's ballot access laws are, specifically ballot access for presidential races. So this does 2 things. One is it basically removes that from the playing field. The relative terribleness of your state on ballot access is no longer going to be a concern, at least in this department. So we're not going to be potentially punishing states for their legislatures being particularly terrible. That was my intention. It did get simplified quite a bit, which I think is fine. But that was my thought process behind this.
Thank you, Mr. Bracco. Ms. Arrowood, and then Mr. Latham. Ms. Arrowood.
Yes, could I ask if Mr. Molman has departed?
Yes, he did.
All right, then Mr. Robertson would be taking Mr. Molman's place.
No, Dr. Moulton would be one. Oh, no, Rufo
he's-
was absent. Gotcha. Thank you.
Right. Okay, it's,
Okay, Mr. Latham?
Yeah, and just maybe to offer the other side of the equation. So it just so happened that as the math worked out, my Utah affiliate takes about a 23% hit on delegates by this new proposal. And even if that was just the case, I still would like to see some kind of incentive for affiliates to promote our national ticket. It maybe doesn't need to the extent that it is now, but that was another one of my reasons for voting against this, was just that this proposal takes that incentive completely out of the equation. Although I do like the simplicity part of it. So I wasn't strongly against it, but I did vote against it.
Hey, I'm going to speak briefly to it. I like the simplicity of it as secretary, but also for affiliate chairs and affiliates. And we start getting into situations like New York. New York's not going to have ballot access, most likely. And this has nothing to do with any LNC or any state affiliate. It has to do with the government sucks. It's in order to do a ballot access drive in New York would be about $400,000. And that's just not happening unless some big sugar daddy comes in, or, some legislatures get a conscience and stop being evil. So, punishing New York because they have a horrible government. That's, part of the motivation there. I like the simplicity of it, and I like promoting our internal membership. I think by very nature of being a political party, that I don't think the states need the incentive. And I don't think they're even thinking of that when they're campaigning for our candidates. They do it because it's our candidates. People do think about it when it comes time for delegate allocation time to raise national members, which raises funding, which ironically will probably get us more ballot access than it being the other way around. I think we need to incentivize membership, because that has, at the risk of sounding like Ronald Reagan, a trickle-down effect of giving more money for ballot access, which will then increase our presidential vote totals. Mr. Rocco, you still had your hand raised. I don't know if that was an artifact.
No. I just want to follow up. It is not just that the government sucks. It's that the New York state government particularly sucks on ballot access. Because we could pass all we want. Government sucks. They're going to keep sucking.
Abolish. Okay. All right. So the next one, Mr. Thrain, on your list, that was, which one was this? This was LP.
P. Yeah,
Okay.
GILP. So P would be the last one.
P.
Last one on my list.
I don't have a P.
There is a proposal P. I don't think we've gotten to it yet.
Yeah. So that hasn't passed out of committee. We can talk about it though. Let me go up here because there's only up through M here, but let's look at this list here. Just give me one sec. I know it's not coming up on your screen yet. P is allow electronic balloting.
And just when we get to it, that's my proposal, by the way. Here's my Toward Liberty mug for everyone. Just enjoy.
I don't think it's particularly productive to discuss the particular language here. I have a feeling it's going to get amended greatly in committee, but I do think it's productive to discuss the concepts and maybe some things people would like to see. Mr. Latham is a huge proponent of this. I'm going to pull up the proposal, but this has not been vetted by the committee. I mean, it's been somewhat reviewed, but let me share a different screen here. I'm going to pull up this proposal. Give me one sec. New share. I don't know if hold on. I've got way too many. I'm not getting this to be able to share.
Yeah, if it's not available, I had not read the full 49 pages or whatever it is. I just went down your list.
Yeah, we've
And I-
only passed up through M, but Mr. Bracco, if you would, excuse me, Mr. Latham, if you'd like to just discuss in general your proposal and what you're hoping to accomplish and to see if there's any member feedback.
Yeah, just the idea is to build capacity in our bylaws for if we ever want to move to electronic voting to give us that capacity. Now, I have two other proposals, for example, to facilitate ranked choice voting and single transferable voting, but but we'll put those in the rules rather than the bylaws, and what I have in mind actually would not require electronic voting. Having said that, it is my understanding, I was trying to find the rule in Roberts that requires, basically Roberts, which is our party's parliamentary authority, requires that if you are going to allow electronic voting, that has to be explicitly authorized in your bylaws. So the intention of this proposal is just to, again, build that capacity. We would still have to put some kind of implementing language into place, via a rule to do that.
Mr. Latham, Roberts does not say that. I think you're getting it confused with electronic meeting, which is different than electronic voting.
Okay.
Roberts does not say electronic voting has to be in your bylaws.
Okay, I may be misinformed, or I'll try to track down what was inspiring me.
It's a good idea to put it in there because the wording of our current bylaws, or the rules at least, strongly imply that it can't be electronic because it talks about signing it and things like that and teller sheets. So our current labyrinth of rules or bylaws would seem to necessitate your proposals. It's not necessitated by Roberts, but it is by our own existing rules. Okay, so the floor is open again to members. If there are any specific proposals you would like to discuss, I'm going to give it a moment. Otherwise, we're going to start to scroll through them, the ones we haven't discussed, and we'll see if anyone has their hands raised. But I'd like to, again, allow this to be a member-driven discussion as much as possible. He's seeing no hands raised, so we're just going to start to go through them. Raise your hands at any point if you want to stop and linger on a particular proposal. The first one is Proposal A, which is Chair Ascension Procedure, which would make it explicit in our bylaws what would happen in the event of a vacancy of the chair. There was a controversy over this last term, and the committee decided it was better to be explicit in our bylaws rather than having it be competing interpretations of Roberts. And the proposal that came out of committee is that the vice chair would automatically ascend. So if there is a vacancy, the national committee appoints new officers, excluding chair. Okay, Proposal B is to raise the membership dues from $25 to $50. Mr. Madden.
Sorry, going back to the previous, I just want to say that I don't understand what the point of a vice chair is if not to take over for a chair in every single organizing body that I have ever seen. That's been the way that things are done. That's also why we have a vice president. That's why, it's never made sense to me why this is not an automatic thing. So thank you.
Just an FYI, some members of the committee disagree, so I'm not trying to, not with what you said, but with what I'm about to say. So I'm not trying to reignite that debate. But the parliamentary opinions that we've gotten have been that it is automatic. However, there has been very learned people good faith people on the committee who do not agree with that interpretation of Roberts. So we decided to make it explicit so that people would not be arguing over this in good faith. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your last name. Is it Mower?
Mauer.
Okay, Mr. Mauer, go ahead.
Yeah, and this, I don't know if this is the correct format to ask this on. So this is my first time here. So anyway, I'm just trying to find out. I would like to help out with promoting libertarian merchandise. And I'm just wondering who I talk to about that.
What state are you in?
Well, my residence is Utah. I work in Kansas currently.
I believe that's okay. So get in touch with Region 1 Representative Miguel Duque, and I can give you his email address. Let me know when you're ready.
You said Miguel?
Yeah,
okay.
MIQUEL dot, or GUL, excuse me, dot DUQUE at lp.org.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, and he'll get you in touch with the right person. Okay, Mr. Seebeck, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, just some background. The reason this proposal came into play is because the controversy had to do with the explicit wording of the bylaws not being all in the same place. And the argument was made that because they were not all in the same place, that it defers to Roberts. And that's, while I totally disagree with that, because bylaws explicit wording trump Roberts, the end result was this proposal, as you now see.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Seebeck. Moving down to B, which is to raise membership dues from $25 to $50. They haven't changed in a really long time, and there's been significant inflation. Our dues are hard-coded in the bylaws. This could be amended. So if somebody felt the better number was $40 or whatever, but it was at least to get this on the table. Dues have been $25 for a super long time and probably too low. At least that was the sense of the committee. And there is a proviso for current sustaining members only. This will go into effect when their current memberships lapse. Proposal C, clarify membership definition. It's just adding one word. There had been a little bit, I don't think the bylaws were unclear, but to some people that they were, as to whether or not the word member could be used of someone who did not sign the pledge. And this is making it explicit. D was withdrawn. I just kept a placeholder there so we didn't jump around in numbers. E, we talked about. F, clarify procedure on dropping candidates. This came up at the last convention. Mr. Starr and Ms. Mattson had raised on the microphone that the way our bylaws are currently written, even though we haven't interpreted it that way, someone could challenge this, that it seems like you can only drop a candidate on the first round because it says when no candidate initially receives a majority. So we deleted the word initially so that the convention rules of order could provide that the candidate with the fewest number of votes is removed from further consideration on all rounds. You know, first round, the second round, third round, which our convention rules currently do say. So there seemed to be an apparent contradiction. We've kind of ignored this in the past and it needed to be fixed. And we deleted the word alternative as just not necessary. It's voting procedures. Okay, we talked about G. H, standardized committee rules. And I just wanted to, in chat, Mr. Roberson, I mentioned a tiered approach. We have had that in the past. It makes it very difficult with the CRM. Simplicity is better for the CRM. So having $25 and then $1,500. However, as long as $25 gets you the rights declared in the bylaws, it does say that the LNC and staff can create additional levels. And we have in the past. We've had like gold memberships at $50, but they don't get additional rights. They did get like special newsletters or something like that. So we already do allow tiered ones. I personally am not in favor of creating additional complications in the bylaws, but in the policy manual, the LNC can create additional levels, but higher than $25. As long as the $25 people are considered members and get the rights under the bylaws. Proposal H, standardized committee rules. We've always had, at least for as long as I can remember, someone who's been around longer, maybe Mr. Roulette or Dr. Moulton can know if this was ever different, but we have two sets of governing documents with the bylaws and the platform, and committees that are committees of the convention to present reports, and it seems very similar to the delegates, but we've had different rules for each one for no apparent good reason, at least. So preferring simplicity, we wanted to make the rules for the bylaws committee the same as the rules for the platform, or vice versa. So we standardized them and the changes here. So rather than having Rule 4, debating and voting bylaws, and Rule 5, debating and voting platform, we just made one rule, which will become Rule 4, debating and voting bylaws and rules committee and platform committee, to make it standard. And one thing that was really bizarre was the platform committee minority. They had a right to a minority report, but the bylaws committee did not. This would give a right to the minority on the bylaws committee for a minority report as well. And we also dropped the amount of time in which the recommendation was open to debate without amendment. It usually becomes pretty clear within that amount of time if something's going to pass or not. It depends on the strength of the proposals and sometimes the persuasiveness of the chair of the committee. We deleted number 6 because this never happens. And the fact is, if somebody has additional proposals, whether or not they were considered by the platform committee but didn't receive a majority vote, they could always move to suspend the rules and hear this. And we have some different proposals to kind of address this later on. But for the amount of time I've been following the party, if time permits, time never permits. So there was no point even in having that. Okay, so next, we talked about that one. Rising seconds. Many state parties have this, most notably California. This is to make sure, the whole purpose of a second is to show not that the person doing a second agrees, but it's to signal to the chair that there's enough support to warrant it taking up time. But in a large body, 1 second doesn't really do that. So we wanted to make this so that the purpose of seconds serves its purpose, that there's enough people who are willing to say, okay, yeah, we should hear this, to avoid wasting time. And the classic example, unfortunately, I know somebody did move this, and I'm not meaning to point them out. I don't even remember who it is. It is to try to stop things from like resolution that Harry Potter was the greatest book of all time. While that might be fun, and it's kind of really fun at the beginning of convention, by the end of convention, everyone is regretting that we spent time on that. And this will cut down on that sort of thing. So we are requiring 20 standing delegates to second. Next is to change timing of platform committee appointments. This again is to make it consistent with the bylaws committee. Also, the platform committee has always been super rushed. It used to be, when this was written, and this was the same for bylaws as well, which I don't know why bylaws was earlier. Maybe they did mail ballots, but this is an old article. It used to be that the platform committee didn't meet or make its proposals until right before the convention. They met the day before the convention and prepared a report. That's the old style, before email, before all of that. That's not the way things work anymore.
That's how both committees used to work.
Yeah, that's crazy pants. It's not that way anymore. So we modernized and made consistent that both committees get selected 12 months before a convention. We talked about the delegate allocation formula and change timing of credentials committee appointments. Again, this is extending the time. The credentials committee has said that it's been pretty rushed. Right now, they have to be selected 3 months prior to convention. Now we've made it 6, so that they have enough time, particularly in the electronic age where they need to get used to the CRM or whatever credentialing software they're using, that there might be bugs or needs to be training with state chairs. So we moved to change that. And that is it for what we have passed so far. So is there any further member commentary, questions, or suggestions for things you would like us to consider in the future? I'm going to leave the floor open. Mr. Madden.
I have one suggestion that may be highly controversial. I would like to see the national LNC move to a central committee model. And I would like to see a bylaws proposal to facilitate that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Madden. I do believe there are some people on the bylaws committee who have, well, Mr. Molman has suggested that. I'm going to give you my feedback on it, but of course it's a committee decision. I believe major changes need to have a groundswell of support and be moving towards that. This has not been something I have seen a groundswell of support for. And major structural changes should come from the bottom up, not from committees down, particularly with the structure we have now, where proposals from the committee are so privileged as opposed to proposals from the floor. So if a radical structural change to the LNC were to take place, that's not something I personally support, but we will see if the rest of the committee does. I generally don't vote on things unless it's to cause or to break a tie. But if it came down to causing or breaking a tie, I would break it to fail. Mr. Latham, Mr. Bracco, and then Mr. Madden again.
I just wanted to ask Mr. Madden to clarify what he means by a central committee structure. Does that mean that there's a central committee and then they would do the business of appointing officers? Because I have been warmed to that idea as well.
Yes, to that effect, it would be my imagining of this would be that you would have 50 people that would then elect the officers of the party, and those 50 people would be either the state chairs, or they would be some other higher officer that the states themselves would put forward. It makes no sense for there to be two separate, I guess, entities interacting with a higher body, where you could have a member of LP National that is not a member of their state, and they be a delegate. It's very odd that can happen. To me, if we're going to have a tiered structure or representative structure for that matter, it should model a representative structure. Counties to their states to national, that sort of thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Madden.
Thanks.
Oh, I guess there was a hand up that went down. Okay, is there any further?
Well,
Mr. Madden?
just to expand on something that was said by the chair, or maybe a slight rebut. If proposal I were to pass, then it makes it even harder for a proposal to come from the delegates on the floor. if that is the nature of, if that's how you want it to come through, then that is counter to that. So
no, it doesn't make it necessarily. I don't think saying 20 people need to second make it so harder to come through. It makes it harder to waste time. Something is not going to pass by 2/3 if you don't get 20 people to stand up for it.
that was not proposal I. Proposal I was the changing 20% to 1/3 and also bringing.
That's platform deletions, Mr. Madden.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I mixed those two. Thank you.
That's okay. And just an FYI, we have a proposal coming up. It's my proposal that Mr. Bracco has also worked on to have it so actually that there is a clear procedure for hearing proposals from the floor that have been thought out and vetted with proper notice rather than an ambush. But let me just tell you in general, my philosophy that I ran on when I was elected chair of this committee, first interim chair by the LNC, and then honored to be elected chair by the committee itself. I have a very conservative view of committees. I do not believe committees are happy changing grounds, that you get 10 people that indulge every flight of fancy that they have, that they need to be reflecting things that they have heard significant support for from their states, or because of specialized knowledge that they have, it's a problem that they see coming up. So that's just the particular philosophy that I guide this committee by, is that our changes need to be addressing either really apparent problems or things that have been swelling up in the party. I don't think radically changing the structure of the LNC is something that has been. And I think that can be an existential threat if not done properly. And radically changing the structure of the LNC, I don't think should be something that should be just workshopped by a committee of 10. That should be perhaps something that the 50 state chairs get together and start workshopping and vetting out to their members. It'd be a multi-year process of getting exactly what's right. I do not trust just the judgment of 10 people and some alternates to take 50 years of history and radically change the structure of this party. I personally just think that would be somewhat arrogant of the committee, but that's my particular view. Again, even though I have the right to vote, I generally don't on this committee. Mr. Bracco had his hand raised and then
It was just to clarify, because you had said proposals from the floor. It's actually specifically not proposals from the floor. It is a path to member proposals.
Yes. I was using that kind of sloppily.
Yes. Well, I just wanted to clarify because it's like exactly the opposite of that.
Yes. I meant proposals from membership. When I said floor, I was using floor as synonymous with not the committee. And another thing I would say, if the LNC was chosen that way, we might as well go to every 4-year conventions, because nobody's going to really go to the off year one. It's not a value added. People go to the off year one to choose the LNC. And perhaps that's good. I tend to think coming together every couple of years is good for the party. Yeah, Jessica had said what I was trying. I'm going to just put this because on the video, this doesn't get on the record. Ms. Tewksbury said, yes, being on the committee doesn't mean you should be trying to shove your personal ideas onto the whole party. It should be to facilitate what you're seeing needs changes based upon party members' feedback, outcry, etc. I took that same approach in my state and only proposed what I knew needed clarifying, as I had multiple counties ask me about that thing. Of course, she's referring to on a state level. Any further member suggestions? And Mr. Madden, I hope that my pushback wasn't too harsh. I know you well, you're a friend of mine, so I felt free to kind of push back pretty strongly, but please don't take that personally. And again, committee decides, not the committee chair. Is there any further feedback? Okay, hearing none, it looks like we are going to get to some business for a half an hour, but I doubt we're going to get to any votes because I think the next one is the one that deals with proposals for membership, isn't it, Mr. Bracco? Or
This is the notice.
okay, all right. So
It's
thank you, everyone, of the members of the party that came. We'll probably be having about 3 more of these. Please, if you have any other feedback, come to our meetings. Notice is always provided on the lp.org website. You can always email me or any of the other committee members. But if you can't find their emails, at secretary@lp.org and ask me to forward it to the bylaws committee, I'll certainly do that. Also, I can tell you, I don't know whether this will happen, but it is our intention to perhaps, as it comes closer to convention, have like a mock debate, like we're presenting these proposals to presumptive delegates and seeing how votes may go. That will help us craft and maybe add or drop proposals, and we'll have the typical survey. But the spirit of why we started so early this term was to get as much member involvement as possible. So it was very exciting to see as many members as showed up. You are welcome to stay. We love having members at our meeting. Ms. Arrowwood, if you could retake roll, because we're going to now move into committee business. So I'm saying we're adjourning, quote unquote, the town hall at 8:15 and calling to order an actual committee meeting at 8:15. We'll only have a half hour left. The committee is, of course, free to extend time. I would kind of ask just a personal request that you don't. Mr. Seebeck is in town. He's down in my living room, and I'm traveling to Florida tomorrow. And I'm hoping to go out to dinner with Mr. Seebeck. As you know, he's one of my best friends, if not my best friend. And I don't get to see, since he moved to Alabama like a traitor out of Colorado, I don't get to see him as often as I'd like. So I really would like to get to spend some time with Mike. But of course, it's up to the committee. So I'm going to.
Traitor. I'm just an advanced scout. And besides, I got a morning flight myself.